Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast, and my name is Robin Dreeke. I'm the founder and CEO of People Formula, as well as a retired head of the FBI Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program, where I spent my career strategizing how to recruit spies by forging trust. Forging trust is an essential skill for engaging and building an innovative culture, but we aren't as effective as we need to or we want to be. Therefore, tune into my podcast, Forged by Trust, to master the behavioral skills and communication techniques required for exceptional leadership, partnerships, and success. Joining me today on the Forged by Trust podcast is Abbie Marono. Abbie is a nonverbal communications and social influence coach and a university lecturer in social psychology, and went on to do her PhD in behavioral analysis before founding and directing the research group BRINC. This is the Forged by Trust podcast, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I know I sent you a few questions that I wanted to cover beforehand, but I actually have one little surprise one at the end. It's more fun than anything because I've become more of a sugar fanatic, so I might ask you something about that. Anyway, I did the intro for Abbie before we started. Amazing researcher in the area of nonverbals and trust. I'm excited to have her on the show today because she has actually got a mutual friend. Our good friend, Joe Navarro, put us in touch, and it was another great day when Joe connects with me than anyone. With that, Abbie, thank you and welcome to the show.
And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And so I have some great questions. Well, I think they're good because I think they actually all go around forging trust and building those relationships using your area of expertise. But I'll let you explain your area of expertise. So when did you realize that nonverbals and trust was an area of interest to you? And basically, what do you do?
So, I was interested in nonverbal communication since I started studying psychology in school. And just like anyone that goes into forensics, I was interested in lie detection and nonverbal cues of deception. And when I started as an undergrad, within my first month, I started working with one of my lecturers at the university. And I published my first two papers on nonverbal cues of deception, which of course actually was just high stress. And then I started my PhD with the goal to continue with that line of research. I started designing the questions of my thesis to look at how we can use nonverbal communication to detect lies and influence information elicitation. And when I was designing my research and really diving into the literature, it became really clear to me that I was on the complete wrong track, and people don't want to share information with people that they think are manipulative. And we want to share information with people that we feel safe with and people that we feel positive towards. And there is no Pinocchio effect. There is no single cue that shows we're lying. So I had this entire research shift, and I realized that the only really effective way to create information elicitation is to create cooperation and harmony. So all of my research now focuses on creating trust and cooperation through nonverbal communication.
Abbie, I don't think anyone can see it. I got goosebumps. I literally have goosebumps on my arm because, you stumbled across understanding of life and human existence that I did by mistake. My career of recruiting spies and going through all these classes on learning how to manipulate and elicit information and do all the spooky dark art stuff really was a path to nowhere. Because as you so eloquently just said, without trust, without building those cooperative relationships, all things fall apart. So what was that moment like when all of a sudden your entire premise for everything you're researching, which was nonverbals of deception, that bubble kind of burst?
Yeah, you would expect it to be disappointing, because I look back at my first two research papers and I almost cringe inside, the conclusions that I drew and the research focus that I had. But it's so exciting because it opens up this whole new field, and it actually makes you realize human beings, we're not designed to look for deception. We're not designed to be manipulative. It gives you some kind of hope in the human race because we really are designed to be cooperative. And this actually brings me to one of your other questions of, about what I've learned since we began. And this field made me dive into behavioral economics and evolutionary theory of why do we cooperate? Why is trust the most important thing? Why is it trustworthiness why is that the first judgment that we make? And if we think back to our evolutionary history, where we had this dangerous environment where there was threats all the time, be it from a predator, starvation, we lived in such dangerous times. So cooperation was essential, because if we cooperated and we had a secure group, we were more likely to survive. What we actually wanted to look for was who to cooperate with. We need to distinguish between who is cooperative and who is not cooperative. That's why these nonverbal cues have evolved, to show that I am trustworthy, to show that you can cooperate with me. And we are so cognitively lazy. We don't want to search, especially if we're in a threat situation. We don't want to stop and think, is it safe? Is it not safe? We just come to a snap decision. So we need this efficient system where we can recognize behaviors of trustworthiness, which is why we're hardwired to instantaneously interpret nonverbal signals of trustworthiness. And research has shown that when we look at a face, we make judgments of trustworthiness in 33 milliseconds. In 33 milliseconds, we judge if someone's trustworthy. So we haven't evolved to look for deception, because it's so cognitively effortful to search for someone who's trying to be manipulative. And I don't have time to do that. Do you have time to do that, everyone you look for? No.
Too much energy.
Look for these. Exactly. So we look for these cues to show that we're trustworthy. And of course, people can slip through because they can fake a cue and they can manipulate you to show trustworthiness when they're not. But that's not a long-standing system. That isn't going to be effective, because we've evolved social groups. So we've evolved gossip. So if someone is a non-cooperator, it's not going to take long for you to be aware they're a non-cooperator, because we have our social groups. If you're looking to buy insurance, what do? You go on Google and look for reviews. You see what other people have said about them, because we trust other people's opinions. And that's why we've just not evolved to look for deception. We don't have cues to show deception. We are terrible deception detectors. We are just awful at it because we haven't evolved to do it. We are, however, really, really good at picking up cues of trustworthiness.
How good are we at it? It's a neat little rabbit hole that you brought up. We assess it so rapidly. What did you say? 3 milliseconds, you said?
Yeah. So 33 milliseconds is
right.
How quick we make the judgment. The thing about judgment is we are very, very accurate at picking up cues and recognizing cues, but our perceptions doesn't actually necessarily reflect the actual trustworthiness. It just reflects our ability to pick up on that cue. So when we make these accurate judgments, it's not actually accurate in terms of how trustworthy that person is. It's how accurately they're showing cues of trustworthiness.
Right. So how do we get better at it?
Practice, awareness. It's like anything. Like if you want to be a good tennis player, you learn all of the cues, you learn the rules, you know exactly how to do it, but you won't just step out on the court and go, I'm a fabulous tennis player, I'm world class because I've learned the rules perfectly. You have to practice and practice and practice, and you have to apply it. And it's the same with showing cues of trustworthiness. You have to learn the cues and learn what people look for, learn why, and practice it, and put it in your everyday life, make it part of who you are.
Have you gotten better at it?
Hopefully.
So from the beginning of your voyage and your research until now, could you give yourself a percentage of how accurate you were assessing trustworthiness before you began this research and what it's at now? Again, I know it's anecdotal. I know you're a researcher and you like specifics, but if you could give yourself a guess, how much better?
Hopefully a lot. I am a good observer because it's part of my job to be a good observer. However, when it comes to ourselves, none of us are that good. I mean, you could be a world-leading behavior analyst, but when it comes to making judgments of people you're in an interaction with, when it's someone you're emotionally invested in, it's really hard to be objective. It's great to make the judgments on other people when you have no emotional ties to them, but it is very difficult to be fully objective. And I think we'll talk about that a bit when we talk about approachability. But what you will learn when you do start to show cues of trustworthiness and learn how to interpret behavior is how to step away from your initial judgments, because nonverbal communication is so automatic, it's so powerful and fast, and it's so easy. Once we see a cue, we explain it away to ourselves, we make a judgment, and then we reassure ourselves why we've made that judgment. But once we're aware of these behaviors, once we're aware of this, we can step away from that judgment and actually reflect. And I don't know if you've read the book Thinking Fast and Slow, or Thinking Slow and Fast, about these quick judgments that we make. And if we actually take a second and then go the slow route and actually think about why we made those judgments, we can change it.
And you brought up an amazing point about our lack of objectivity when it comes to ourselves. Probably one of the most common questions I get asked is, how do you detect fraud and deception when someone's doing it to you? And my general response is kind of like the same response of, can you detect deception? And I said, you can't. I said, because if we had come up with a really good system to detect when someone's trying to manipulate us, take advantage of us, and all these things after these thousands of years, we would have found it. And so I always say the most important thing we need in life to not be taken advantage of is the loving critic. And that is someone who's emotionally vested in our success, but not emotionally attached to our outcomes, because they can be objective. They can cognate these situations for us objectively because they're not emotionally tied to it in the same way. Like you said, it's so refreshing to have someone else actually in a much more articulate way. But yeah, I think objectivity is critical. And the funny thing is, and tell me your thoughts on this, I find that we're hard pressed to do that action, because if we're actually going to seek the thoughts and opinions of others, admit that we're fallible, admit that we're imperfect, that rankles us as a human being, because we fear being rejected, we fear not being accepted, and we loathe being any sense of vulnerability. And so a lot of times we reject the notion of seeking help and seeking objectivity from others. Thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. We are so self-deceptive. We want to self-preserve. We want to be confident and we want to be assured in ourselves. So when something threatens that, we do get defensive. And when we do, like I said, we explain our judgments away. We make a snap judgment and we pick up on these cues. And then we explain to ourselves, oh, I made it because of this. I made it because of this. And we didn't. We don't want to step back and say, actually, why did I make this judgment? Maybe I could have, thought through it in a slower, more cognitively less efficient way. But we don't tend to want to do that.
No, we hate it. And you hit upon another beautiful word, approachability. And we talked about this, I think, briefly, when we first met. And someone, again, once asked me, so Robin, if you see an entire group of people, if you're at a diplomatic function trying to recruit Russian spies, which is the hot topic right now, how do you make that judgment on who do you approach? In other words, who's more approachable? My quickest response is easy. Find the one who's smiling. I know it probably goes a little more in depth than that, especially since, see if we can wrap your area of expertise, which is from the waist down, as well as, talk about what's approachability? How do you assess approachability? In other words, if Abbie was given a room of foreign diplomats and you said, hey, you got to go recruit one, who would you choose and why?
So, displaying approachability and how we assess approachability are kind of the same thing. So open postures, open body language,
Describe
when we're open. So open in terms of, rather than being, my arms aren't together, my legs together and my knees together, everything really, really closed, palms towards me. More open is kind of, your hands spread out and, as if, say, a hug versus a self hug. I'm facing towards you. Things like the lower body, again, going with this open posture. So when we look at the lower body, literally just moving my foot towards you versus away from you changes how approachable I appear. And these are things that we can change on our own body language. So if I want to appear more approachable, when someone's coming towards me, I angle my body towards them and I widen my arms. I widen even my fingers versus having my fingers close together. That has an effect on approachability. And if you're coming towards me and I do that, I'm showing to you that I'm open to conversation. But if you come towards me and I just turn my head and not my torso or my lower body, and I don't point my foot towards you, that shows that I'm closed off. It actually creates a perception of unapproachability. And this is research that I've done myself that is hopefully going to be published quite soon. And it shows that these small changes between if I angle my body away from you versus towards you massively changes perceptions of approachability.
I got a question on that because I know this inevitably comes up because I get asked this a lot as well. I'm a big believer in observing the tempo, pace, and openness of someone else before you try to force their tempo and pace, because you always have to make it about them if you want to forge trust and build those great connections. But we do have those hard charges that will just love to barrel through those, those observations anyway, because they're on a time crunch, they're on a time constraint, the pressure from the boss is on them. I got to make this connection. What happens if someone sees these cues and just barrels through them anyway? If someone is giving you the nonverbal display that they're not approachable, what happens to that individual that barrels through it?
So when we are showing someone that we feel a certain way, or we want to be approached, or we don't want to be approached, especially when we're talking things like proximity, if you're getting too close and I'm stepping back and you continue to, I feel invalidated because I'm showing you I feel this way. I want you to know how I feel because I'm giving you the cues. And then you're not observing them, and you're observing them and then not taking them into consideration. So instantly that trust is gone because you're telling me I'm not validating how you feel. So I don't feel seen. I don't feel you're trustworthy. And it doesn't make me feel safe. When we're sending signals and people are not listening to them, it says to us that we're not safe. And the one thing that our brains want is safety. We don't want to feel discomfort. We don't want to feel any kind of threat. That is the one thing that our body, drives towards. It's this safety, it's its comfort. And if someone's not recognizing these cues and not acting appropriately, the whole relationship can break down so easily.
I love that word validation. I have my 4 pillars of great communication, and the third one is non-judgmental validation. And this is the first time I've actually had someone connect validation or lack of validation with nonverbals. That was beautiful. I love it. So nonverbals are part of that validation process, as well as not validating and observing someone, and destroys trust before it even had a chance to begin. Absolutely. There's so many things I want to keep talking with you about. What got you into from the waist down? You talk about, and you mentioned a bunch of them, the clusters that, that people that
Yes.
really study nonverbals talk about. And we see a cluster, because just because someone's arms are folded doesn't necessarily mean they're closed off, because if you looked, you got a head tilt, you got a nod, you got a smile, you got a good open, eyebrow elevation. So those are clusters that are countering the one. But you talk about something I had never heard of before. Maybe you can explain a little bit of this, and that's a sequencing of nonverbals.
Yes. So, both of those things, the lower body and the sequencing, brings me really nicely to a research study that I've recently done, looking at a behavior sequence analysis of the lower body. So a sequence analysis looks at how, rather than one behavior meaning one thing, or lots of behaviors occurring at once, it looks at the sequence of when they occur. So I'll explain what I found kind of after I talk through this study, as it will make a bit more sense. But I was interested in the lower body because the lower body is so powerful and honest because it's not socially restrained. And what I mean by that is when we're in a conversation and you said something I disagree with, if I scowl at you, it's just not socially acceptable, and what I'm doing with my hands also is very obvious. So we're very, very aware of what we're doing with our upper body and our face, especially. We're not so aware of what we're doing with our lower body. We don't think if someone's annoyed us, we don't think, I've got to, control my foot movements. We think I've got to control my face. So this anger or this disgust or frustration, it comes out somewhere. And I did a research study looking at interviews. It was a real life interview. So we didn't conduct them. They were carried out live on media. So there was, no fake involvement, no lab studies. It was a real study. And they had interviewees who were interviewed by interviewers who asked something really inappropriate, something that made them very uncomfortable. and they reported they were uncomfortable afterwards, versus interviews that were just neutral. There was no discomfort. And we looked at the lower body behaviors, and we looked at the sequence of what behaviors occurred after the uncomfortable question was asked. And what we found was really, really interesting. And I talk about this open versus closed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really important here because all of the behaviors of the lower body were exactly the same in both conditions. They did lots of blocking behaviors, which is we put our hands on the groin or we cross our arms. We see these and we say, they're blocking behaviors. I don't like what I'm hearing. I don't like what I'm seeing. And that isn't the case. They were seen in both conditions exactly the same. But the difference was in the neutral condition, there was a lot of sort of legs spread. They had their legs, wide, their feet pointing out, their knees pointing out. But in the other condition, after the uncomfortable question was asked, the knees come together or the feet come together and the feet tuck under the chair. But it's not just the single behavior, because one single behavior isn't telling. What it is, if I tuck my feet under my chair and then I close my knees, that indicates discomfort. Or I do all those things, those behaviors in a certain sequence, that shows discomfort. But if I tuck my feet and then open my knees, there's no discomfort. So if I just take that one behavior and say discomfort, that's not correct, because it's important what behavior came first and what behavior came after. And that actually indicates the emotion behind it.
So that's a lot of information for one individual,
yes.
and it's very powerful. So two challenges with that. First, obviously, I think the Zoom world is very challenging
yes.
to do this because we're generally seen from the chest up. And, this is something we had talked about before. I'm curious for you to share it. How accurate and how good can one person be, or is there benefit of having more than one person? So what would you recommend? So if someone's going into a meeting, going into an engagement with someone, maybe a brand new client, someone they're trying to build and forge trust with for a partnership or something, what would you recommend?
So we are very bad judging other people objectively, because when we have emotional investment in someone or we want something from someone, we seek it. And we kind of interpret their behaviors how we feel. Our mood and our personality changes how we perceive certain cues. So I agree with having a third person, someone objective, someone that just wants the benefit from you, but isn't doing it from a selfish perspective and isn't doing it from, I don't need this. It is objective. So they can observe you, and they can tell you if you're presenting the right cues too. So it's not just assessing that third person. It's saying, they were showing these cues, which you weren't realizing, but you were also showing these cues and you could have presented yourself better this way. So I think having a third person is a great idea.
Yeah. And you just highlighted another challenge there, and that is the trustworthiness that someone has to communicate those potential negative emotions that nonverbals that your partner or whoever you're working with is giving off. Matter of fact, I just got done reading a book, No Rules. It's a Netflix story. And one of the things they're always calling out is each other for those negative behaviors. And when you don't do it, big deals can go sideways because someone gave off those nonverbals and yet no one called them out on it. So I'm curious also, during all the research that you've done and all the work you've done, what would you say some of the biggest stumbler blocks or challenges that you had along the way?
So probably because there's so many misconceptions and myths when it comes to nonverbal communication, that it's hard for people to take the field seriously sometimes. People always want to ask, if I cross my arms, am I being defensive? If I look up and left, am I lying? And
let's talk about that too.
When we take these myths in and we believe them, not only does it make the field, hard to accept honestly, but it actually leads to bad practice. Because if we think that these cues are deceptive or defensive, we're going to interpret them that way and react as if they're being defensive. And it's also hard as a researcher too. Like I said, I stepped into the field looking for cues for deception because it was all over the media, because I was obsessed with Lie to Me, like any psychologist is. Yeah.
That was a good show.
Yep. And then, it's hard to unpick the truth from the lie when it comes to nonverbal communication. And because there's so many contradicting things presented, and in a lot of journals, they don't present negative findings. So I've had to carry out so many studies that have failed to figure out what isn't true. Right. And because it's not in the literature, because they don't like to publish those things that fail. They like to publish the things that work. And then, like I said, as a researcher, you have to come across those things yourself and realize that it doesn't work. And that is a lot of effort. You can spend years doing that. And I spent years publishing in a field before I realized that I was on the wrong track, and then led me to trust.
Well, I'm so glad you found that track, because I've said it a number of times too, when I talk and work with law enforcement, when it comes to deception indicators, if you give yourself that confirmation bias that you're looking for deception, you're going to miss all the truth indicators out there, because you keep looking for the wrong ones. And that it is a stumbling stone that a lot of people fall across. So, I want to start moving towards maybe some specific things that people can start incorporating in their lives to, as you so eloquently put, moving beyond nonverbals and utilizing nonverbals to forging that trust. What would be some suggestions you have that people could maybe start incorporating into their lives now? What would be like 1 to 3 top things? Because I know you don't want to overwhelm the brain with new things all at once. But if someone is looking to forge better trust by utilizing some of your observation tools and techniques, what would you recommend first?
I would say always remember that for the brain, safety is trust. So when you're looking how to create trust with someone, don't think, how do I make this person trust me? Think, how do I make this person feel safe enough to put their trust in me? And the first thing, and it sounds so simple, smile. We have so much neurological evidence that when we see a smile, a genuine smile, it releases oxytocin in the brain. And oxytocin releases fear, and arguably it moderates the flight instinct too. It also reduces stress associated with risky behavior. So if we're in a negotiation, a genuine smile can go such a long way. And like I said, it sounds so simple, but it's so effective. And number 2, emotional expressivity. We perceive people who are emotionally expressive as more trustworthy. So if you have a neutral face, there's no cue of trustworthiness coming out. And I said we look for cues of trustworthiness. And if we don't see it, we don't have a yes, a no, a maybe. We have a yes or a no. We have a safe, unsafe, trust, no trust. We don't have that maybe. So if there is no cue of trustworthiness, if there is no emotional expression, then there is no trust. So neutral is negative. And probably third one, consistency. Yes. Consistency in terms of the whole interaction. So if you're smiling and being expressive at the beginning, don't expect that to carry on to the end. If you've smiled when you start the interaction, and then when you leave, you're not smiling, and you're not being expressive, that trust isn't going to continue. You have to be consistent, but also consistency across interactions. So if I'm really bubbly and smiley and friendly one day, and then really grouchy and rude the next day, trust is gone. And again, if I'm not consistently showing you these trustworthy behaviors in multiple interactions, that trust will not persist. It's got to be consistent.
Yeah, a good solid baseline of consistent trust behaviors, which, brings us to, I think, one of the greatest challenges that people have is culturally when it comes to these things. I worked in Russia most of my career. I think the entire world has seen so many pictures of Putin as the expressionless, non-smiling, which also is not just him, but it's culturally, to smile is not right, and so they're trained not to do it at a young age. How does someone account for and then mitigate and not misinterpret? How do we overcome some of those challenges, if we can at all?
So the smile is mostly universal, but obviously, certain cultures have certain traditional behaviors, and they have different customs, and we have different nonverbal behaviors, which are typical of different cultures. So learn the culture. If you are interacting with someone from a different culture, show them respect by researching their behaviors. Research behaviors that are typical of that culture, because if you're showing a certain behavior and you don't realize that can be offensive in their culture, the relationship's going to break down. They don't feel validated. If you go the extra mile and research what behaviors are typical for them, what behaviors make them feel comfortable, how close do they like to be. Different cultures have a preferred distance. So, some cultures prefer to be closer, some prefer to be further away. Research it, do that extra effort, find out what's comfortable for them and apply it, make them feel validated. And it's going to be impossible to learn and memorize every tradition for every culture. So always prepare, find out where your interaction partner is from, if they're from a different culture, and be respectful and learn those behaviors.
And when in doubt, just ask.
Yes,
I always
exactly.
found that, if I don't understand a culture, and again, you can't make these broad sweeping generalizations, because for you as an individual, it could be completely wrong. So
Yes.
when in doubt, you demonstrate that you're by validating them, you're seeking their thoughts and opinions, you're making it about them, and you're seeking their guidance. You're curious. Curiosity is an amazing skill set when building trust, I have found as well. Abbie, this has been a great, packed, dense set of information I think a lot of people could benefit from. What haven't I asked you that you think is really critical, if anything, maybe we hit it all, that you think would be a great takeaway for people to have?
Just practice, practice, practice. Learn what behaviors are perceived as trustworthy, because there are so many. Learn what makes people typically feel comfortable. Learn what puts people off. Learn what makes people feel uncomfortable, and apply it and practice it. And, record yourself having a meeting, having a fake meeting, and pick up on your own negative behaviors. And it is uncomfortable and it's horrible learning something new. But if you want to make people feel comfortable and you want to be a master observer, you've got to put the work in and make it part of your personality. Don't just expect to learn trustworthiness cues and then use them as tools. They're not tools.
Right.
They should be part of who you are. Because like I said, with consistency, if I use the tool sometimes and then not others because it's a tool, I pick it up, put it down. When you interact with me another time and I'm not showing you the same things, I'm suddenly untrustworthy. So learn it, apply it, make it part of who you are.
Yeah, that is great advice. Years and years ago, when I was first in the Marine Corps and at Parris Island as a new series commander, and this is Marine Corps boot camp, which is, to me, it was this pinnacle event in my life. And I remember I was about to do what's called a pickup speech, where me as not a brand new, but as a junior officer, I have 240 brand new Marine Corps recruits and 16 drill instructors that are watching me, and everyone's watching me and observing me. And I have to give this verbatim speech that lasts about 10 to 15 minutes. I have all these places on the floor I'm supposed to stand and say exactly these things. And I remember going to my senior Marine who's advised me, I go, how should I be? And he gave me the best advice that you just said. He goes, just be yourself, because they're going to see through anything else. And that is the best advice I can always give anyone, just like you just did. And that is, these are great tools and techniques, but you have to do that practice, put in that time, because they have to become part of your personality. Because if not part of your personality, your communication style, your tempo, they're going to come across as fraudulent. And when you look like you're trying to deceive someone in any way, trust is blown. And to get it back, good luck. You have to give up all of yourself, give it to the other person, and go on their timeline when they're going to give it, if they're going to give it. So I just say, never just blow trust. Simple to say, hard to do. So with that, I have one final question for you. I don't know what it is, so I had given up. I love stoicism because it's a very cognitive, thoughtful way to deal with life. And so I did a stoic challenge at the beginning of the year. So I gave up alcohol on January 1st, and I'm still sticking with it. But I found living an alcohol-free life has caused massive sugar cravings in my life. So I had these little cheat foods that I really enjoy. So I'm curious, Abbie, as a great researcher, as a great scientist, what's your cheat food, if you have any?
See, I am big on research on the microbiome. I do a lot of biopsychology. So I'm probably not a very interesting person to ask that question to, because mine is, what does my gut bacteria want to eat? So my go-to food is porridge, but plain oats or oatmeal. So or orange juice.
All right. For the first time I asked that question, this is going to be probably the most unusual, great answer. I'm going to rank that up as when I asked my wife her favorite food before we got married, and she gave me the most unusual answer next to this one. This is going to go down. So I asked my wife that question. She says carnival food, like candied apples.
Is that a food group?
It is to her. So again, it blew my mind because nothing I was expecting. So Abbie, when I asked you what your favorite cheap food was, and I get porridge, it's right up there with that answer. So I really appreciate it. Abbie, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise in this area. I am so humbled and grateful that Joe put us in touch, that we've become friends, and I can't wait to continue to be a part of your life and your research, because you're making me better and smarter at what I do. And as our friend Joe always says, if we have at least one bit of information that can benefit another human being, shame on us for not getting it to them. So I thank you for taking that time and sharing your expertise and making others better for having met you. And I'm curious, I want to make sure that people can really find out more about you and your information. Where can people do that?
So you can find me on my website, which is abbemarono.com, or you can find me on Twitter, which is Abbie J. Marono.
Awesome, Abbie. Thank you so much. And I'll make sure I include all that in the show notes. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you enjoyed the show, took away a few new tools, I hope you will leave a great review of the show to show your support. If you're interested in more information about how to forge your own trust building strategies, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. You can also follow me on my social media sites included in the show notes. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of Forged by Trust.